Well, hello and welcome to the Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm very, very sorry for all of our technical issues, which has taken almost an hour to sort out. So I mean, I could stay on for a little while. I'm going to get on to Peter, see if he's still available. He may not be available, but I'll nonetheless send a message to him. But thank you all for staying on, and thank you the people who you sent me messages to say, hey, you're still live on YouTube, but I couldn't access it. So I'm sorry for just this. I'm just going to message Peter, but chances are he's not available. So so anyway, I can just start off with a few observations. There aren't really many. Check to see, Mary Kate Golden said, check to see if he's okay. I imagine he's okay. He was okay an hour ago when I told him that we were having problems. So let me see. I think he's typing something. I'll see if he's okay. Yeah. So it's like a working. Good evening, Mr. Samuel. Looking dapper as always. Thank you, Bojan Perko. Let's see. So I think he's going to join us shortly. So anyway, what we had earlier, we had the phone call between Biden and so yeah, we've got the let me just we had the meeting, the telephone call between Biden and Putin earlier, and I think that ended very recently. It was about an hour's phone conversation, and then earlier we had the phone conversation between Lavrov and the Russian foreign minister. The Russian foreign minister Sergei Lavrov, and then the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who is in Australia at the moment. So they had a phone conversation that was earlier this morning, and it was certainly, going by the Russian readout, it was a very tense conversation, and obviously the usual thing that the Russians really presented their position, and it sounded like Lavrov was saying that we can't just go on having these pointless conversations, and moreover, Lavrov was saying that all this war hysteria is really makes the Russians suspect that something is in the works, that the US, UK intelligence agencies may be trying to stage some kind of a provocative incident. And so he's wondering why you're suddenly whipping up this war hysteria. There's nothing whatever is going on to suggest that we're about to attack Ukraine. Why are you doing this? Why are you going on television and saying this? Anyway, here is, I think, Peter, who's going to join us now. Okay, Peter. Yes,
Present.
present and correct. Yes, yes. Unfortunately, you know, YouTube can be very, very problematic, and it took a lot of backwards and forwards before
Well,
finally
you worked on it for an hour, so kudos to George for his efforts. We're here.
it
That's
was
what counts most.
exactly it was an hour's completely useless and pointless work, but nonetheless it was sorted out. I was just talking to the fellow gagglers who have done a very good job. I mean, they've stayed for an hour. Imagine, they could have gone off, grabbed a drink, whatever. But they're very loyal, and so we're much appreciated. But I was just saying that we had this phone conversation between Biden and Putin. I think just ended very recently, and but earlier this morning we had the phone conversation between Lavrov and Blinken, and going by the Russian readout, it sounds like that Lavrov is really getting very, very tired of everything. I mean, he's tired of this war hysteria that is being artificially whipped up, and he's pretty much saying, we suspect that you're trying to stage something because there's nothing going on. Why are you whipping up this hysteria? And in any case, why don't you just address some of the security issues that we have brought to your attention? You still haven't addressed any of those. And it sounds like, he's getting tired of these talks. I mean, why are we having these talks? Talks about what? There's an agenda. Let's talk about the agenda. Let's not just having these pointless conversations. So I haven't yet read readouts of the Biden conversation, but it does seem like, this all of this just seems to be quite pointless. And the war hysteria may also have a more sinister
well, George,
underlying theme.
RT is reporting its lead story right now on its website that there some explosions have been reported by some. Okay. It's not been confirmed.
Explosions where?
Sorry, in Donbass on the point of contact. Mm-hmm. Though it's very sketchy right now. Some people felt a shockwave that has not been confirmed. People in the interior of the two republics have not been able to confirm this. However, it lends very easily to what you just said, because for all the talk of the Russian staging a false flag, which by announcing that they might be, I mean, the whole logic of it is so twisted, it doesn't make any sense. So, of course, if you have all of this people scurrying around doing what they think is Kissinger-like shuttle diplomacy of the 1970s with people like Liz Truss doesn't know where Voronezh and Rostov are. Ouch, that hurts, okay? Yes. And Liz, if you're listening, there is a difference between the Baltics and the Balkans, okay? Here at the Gaggle, we would be more than happy to provide you with a Google map, okay? Pointing out the two. I'm not saying this just to be facetious, but I mean, this has been talk for talk's sake. I mean, what is your game plan? On December 17th, Russia sent a document to NATO and to the United States specifying their security needs and how they would like to reimagine, just said it, reimagine, and restructure your pan-European security. Can you answer these things?
Right. No, I quite agree. The war hysteria. I mean, there's something odd that's going on. I mean, it could be that it's in preparation for some sort of a provocation that the intelligence services of the West, that means the US and UK intelligence services, have got something in the works. It could be just a way of relieving the US and UK governments of serious domestic problems. I mean, Johnson is fighting for his survival. Biden's numbers are just tanking, contemptibly. His inflation numbers are horrific. So there is that. Again, Macron, he's got a big election coming up very shortly. So there are obviously domestic issues.
And Schultz wants to demonstrate his mettle. Okay.
Right. And so, the Russians are in a bind because they're very polite and they're very, they want to maintain this diplomatic courtesies. But there is going to be a point at which they're getting tired of the constantly trooping off to see Moscow, and then they're not really making any concessions. So there was the meeting of the Normandy format in Berlin on Thursday, and then this Ukrainian foreign minister says, well, under no circumstances are we going to meet the representatives of the Donetsk and Lugansk. Well, if that's your position, then Minsk is just null and void, because it's there explicitly stated that everything is going to be done in agreement with the representatives of the Donetsk and Lugansk. So that means if he says this, it means France and Germany are not applying any kind of pressure on Ukraine to comply, in which case, again, then why are you coming to Moscow? I mean, Moscow's already spelled out, this is what needs to be done to implement this agreement. It's up to you to lean on Kiev. If you're not doing it, then there's no point in having these more and more of these stupid meetings.
What seems to be in play here, particularly the two antagonists in all of this, the UK and Britain, two leaders that are under siege right now. So with evacuate dependents, tell your foreign nationals, get out because it's imminent. George and I think we have a common understanding what that word means. I think it's very elastic for the Anglo-Saxon powers here. And then what they want to do is at a certain interval, this is one possible trajectory, is that, see, we deterred them. They didn't invade.
That's
okay,
it. No,
we did it.
Definitely.
Definitely.
Yeah,
okay.
absolutely.
However, there's a problem with that, and there's a big one. Military materiel of lethal level being sent to Ukraine. So they're treating Ukraine as a de facto NATO member.
Right.
Okay, and at a certain point where their machinations to solidify Ukraine as a de facto member will become a fact on the ground. See, this is, and the Russians know this, okay? Yes. And so if they're going to be deploying intermediate missiles on the border of the Donbass, which is it's just a skip over into Russia proper, and the Russians know that they're playing this game. They know it. If they're playing a game of brinksmanship in which they have really no skin in the game, and they've cowed their European colleagues into this strategy. And so, just like COVID, it's over. Right. But that won't satisfy the demands that were made on December 17th to NATO and to the United States. Nothing has been resolved.
Yes. No, I think that's excellent. I mean, I think that in terms of how much military hardware they're actually putting in Ukraine, I think that it's going to reach a critical mass at some point. I mean, I don't think it's reached the critical mass right now, and that's why they're not making any direct threats that we're going to act in the very near future. But the amazing thing is that when they say, well, Russia's going to attack, Biden supposedly said it'll be Wednesday, and I think Der Spiegel saying it's Tuesday. What are they suggesting? What they say is that Russia will act. What power in the recent past attacked without any warning, without any list of demands, without any kind of an ultimatum? Well, Barbarossa, when Germany attacked the Soviet Union. There was nothing. I mean, it was just simply an unprovoked attack. It wasn't preceded by any kind of list of complaints or grievances or threats or ultimatums. It was just came out of the blue. I mean, obviously they knew about the buildup, but it wasn't preceded by any attempt to justify this attack. That's what they're saying Russia's going to do. Russia's going to just simply attack Ukraine and head off down to Kiev. They're going to put a blockade at Kiev. I mean, the people who write this have no understanding of history or geography. First of all, Ukraine is a bloody big country. It's not some little country you can just simply, you get to Kiev and then you're going to just simply blockade it. I mean, I'm leaving aside the blockades. That's a big undertaking to start blockading an enormous city like Kiev. This is just fantasy world, and it's doing it to demonize Russia because it's suggesting that Russia is capable of acting in such an aggressive, vicious, inhumane way.
Well, I mean, to add to your theory here, look, after when the coup regime designed and implemented its anti-terrorist operation against the Donbass, well, I mean, if the logic of what you just explained to us were in play, then why didn't they just absorb the Donbass into Russia?
Exactly.
Why didn't they? They didn't.
Exactly.
As a matter of fact, they were going to have a vote to ask that, and the Kremlin said, "Don't do it. Don't do it. We don't want you to do it." Okay.
That's a very good point.
If it was territorial enhancement, then that would have been a no-brainer. That could have been done with with a pen and paper. It would have been done, but the Russians didn't want it. So their whole theory of unprovoked attack, to what end? What does that mean? I'm completely lost here. Okay, as George and I have said repeatedly, and I think we're spot on. At the end of the day, the Russians don't care who's running Kiev. Okay, they don't want a hostile military alliance on their border. That's all.
That's right. That's exactly right. Because of course, if they really wanted to absorb Donetsk and Lugansk, then there's an easy way of doing it. They'll say, all right, we can agree on, hold a referendum. You hold a referendum, then we in Russia will hold a referendum, and then we'll have a constitutional process. We'll debate it in parliament and see whether there's a support for absorbing it. In other words, we can go through a step-by-step process, as they did in the case of Crimea. Why attack? I mean, these are people who are very, very happy. They want to be absorbed into Russia. So why use force when they can get this done through a legal, constitutional, deliberative process?
And public, very public.
Right. Yeah. So it makes no sense.
This is one of the things that's so painful for me living here, is that they keep saying Russia's foreign policy is irrational. Well, no, it's not. It's completely rational. Right. And this imminent invasion thing, this is completely absurd. It's in the area of fantasy land. Okay, there's no evidence to suggest that this is. But again, I guess it's the third time I'm going to say it. On December 17th, 2 letters were sent out, one to NATO and one to Washington. That's what they want to talk about. Liz Truss, I don't even think she's aware of these documents.
Right. No, that's right. And that's why it's so extraordinary that they, the Americans, they just want to talk about Ukraine. And so they've kind of conjured up this thing, this Ukraine crisis. It's entirely conjured up out of thin air. I mean, it's like, the Russians are doing nothing other than holding military exercises within their territory. It's in Belarus, but Belarus is a union state. Crimea is a part of Russia. So they're not doing anything. They're not moving their forces across any borders. It's exercises, and yet the Western political elite, the media, have kind of created this absolute fiction.
Like Russiagate.
It is like Russiagate. You've invented this whole thing, and then when you invent it, then everybody keeps talking about it, and then it seems like there's something real, because if you're talking about it, there must be something out there that you're talking about.
Okay, this morning I watched last night's Fox News programs because of the time difference, and I watch it on YouTube. And so here I am. I walk the dogs. I make my morning coffee, and then I watch Fox News. What happened when I was sleeping? Okay. Right. And then I check all my other sources, which are copious. Yeah. Nothing's happening. Right. But the war jitters. Oh my goodness, I'm checking my schedule. Maybe I'm going to have to, go in early, or maybe I have to make an extra program. I mean, we're at the preface. But what? Yes, this is completely invented out of whole cloth.
It is totally. And when you look at what that smarmy, squirrely, weaselly character, the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, who incidentally...
You can apply that to so many people. I was waiting for the name to mention, because I could put a lot of other names, fill the blank. I'm sorry, go ahead.
So he was on, yesterday when he was giving his press briefing, So he first of all says, oh, well, we think that an invasion could happen at any moment. And then says, but I think we don't really know whether President Putin has made a final decision yet. So you've now just said it's going to happen any moment. Now you suddenly said he hasn't made his final decision. Well, which is it? I mean, you can't, both can't be right. And then somebody says, some reporter asked him, so you think Russia now has enough forces in place to launch a full-scale invasion? So, well, it all depends on what you mean by full-scale invasion. I mean, I'm saying, yeah, they could undertake a military action. So you start off, you use the word invasion, now you're coming along with military action. So he moves his positions, he just shifts from moment to moment, but the media are still running with the story. Wow, Jake Sullivan said the invasion could happen at any moment. Well, yeah, he said that, and then at one moment, and then 2 minutes later, he said something different. So it's like he's just there's something there for everyone. But yeah.
No, but that game where it's like a maze and you have the metal ball and you have the levers to turn up and then turn down, left and right. And it's kind of like he's guiding us through this little maze, okay? And it's a rolling floor, okay?
Right.
Because he can adjust it anywhere to any position he wants, okay?
Right.
And everyone is just like a rat in a maze, just following along, okay? It's a moving floor, and it's three-dimensional.
That's it. Anyway, we have a super chat from our friend Brett Harris, and he's saying, who's going to put massive sanctions on Ukraine for not implementing Minsk? The United Nations? No, I don't think the United Nations is definitely not going to do that. It's kind of interesting that when you go to sort of Western policymakers, I mean, the ones who actually know a little bit about Minsk, they're also kind of weaselly, and they say, well, Minsk is very ambiguous. It's very, very hard to know what exactly it's saying. So, like you read something in Chatham House, type in Chatham House and Minsk, and say, well, clearly it's very, very hard to understand what is in there. Hastily drafted. What agreement isn't hastily drafted? So hastily drafted. Very hard to know what Minsk is. Well, actually, it was adopted at the United Nations. The United Nations Security Council resolution adopted it. So it's actually part of now the body of international law. So but they're going, oh, well, we really don't know. It says there, and this is what the Russians say, it says you have to negotiate with the representatives of the people. It says there, all of these things. The constitutional change, the parameters for the local elections has to be negotiated between Kiev and the representatives of the Donbass.
And they signed it.
Yep.
So I mean,
signed it. Yeah.
It's a legacy of international law right now. Yeah, I read these weasel things. They're just weasels. Okay. Right. I mean, they look. It's one page. You can read it in like 25 seconds. Right. It's not complicated. As a matter of fact, that's the beauty of it. It's very straightforward, very simplistic. You're saying that the Germans and the French signed it in a stupor? Did Russia have a gun to their head when they signed it?
Right. That's the thing. Yeah,
no, I mean, I've just endlessly come across these things here. The complexity of Minsk 1 and 2. It's not, folks. No. It's really simple.
It really isn't. The problem is that they haven't even begun to try to implement it. I mean, it's like, it's not like, well, we're kind of stuck on point 7. I can't quite understand how we should set about implementing point 7. You haven't even done. You haven't started. The constitutional change. It's been 7 years, and you haven't made the constitutional change. You haven't, discussed the parameters for local election. Yeah. You want to secure the border. You only want one part of the agreement, which is you want to secure your eastern border. Well, it says that comes at the end of the process.
At the end, when everything else is implemented. But then there's the argument. But so many people of the Donbass, Lugansk, and Donetsk have Russian passports. Yeah, it's been years. What are they supposed to do? You've cut them off from the banking system. Pensions are not paid. They can't get documents certified. They can't get married. They can't bury their dead because they need the official stamps, and you cut that off for them. So what do you think people are going to do?
Right,
Okay,
right.
I mean, this is insanity. Oh, the Russians are giving out passports like candy. Yeah, because you've blockaded these people and you killed 14,000 of them. What do you expect?
That's right. That's it. Yeah, yeah. That's right. And what's interesting, I mean, just going back to this question about the sanctions, because of course Russia could impose sanctions, but it chooses not to. And of course, that would be a very interesting problem, because of course, if Russia is still Ukraine's biggest trading partner, because if Russia were to impose sanctions, essentially the entire Ukraine basket case would be dumped in Europe's lap, and of course the United States lap. So then say, really? Now, are you ready to pick up the tab for Ukraine? Are you ready now to essentially take over the Ukraine economy?
And all its corruption.
Yeah, exactly. So
George, but that would not change the geopolitical thinking. Okay, all right, fine. You sanction Russia. Russia doesn't like sanctions. It doesn't like it because it's in a sense a political weapon. However, if it is an existential threat to your security, then they may default to that position. But it doesn't change how they feel about NATO expansion. So then we get a basket case where the basket bottom drops out. You have to take care of it. But it doesn't mean Russia's changed its position about the expansion of NATO.
Yep.
So, I mean, this is the world they're creating. And
that's right.
If you want to get into the morass of the of Ukrainian politics and the Ukrainian economy, you're going to pay a very, very steep price. Look at all of the billions of dollars that have been pumped into that country since 2014. George, where's it gone? Where?
It's a very good point. That's right. What was it that Josep Borrell said this the other day? Oh, we're looking after. European Union has done a great deal for Ukraine. We've spent 17 billion euros. I guess 2014. First of all, that's a lot of money, and you kind of wonder about the European taxpayers. Why? Hey, you've got money for Ukraine, but apparently Hungary is to be penalized because it's not complying with some nonsense.
And he didn't help the Greeks.
Well.
He didn't help the Greeks.
And then
the IMF and the World Bank break their own rules. They break their own rules. They send money to Ukraine, but they wouldn't send it to Greece because Greece, well, we can't break the rules. These are our rules.
That's it.
They broke the rules for Ukraine.
That's it. Yeah, exactly. So that's right. But so they spent all this money. Exactly. Where is it gone? I mean, Ukraine is really one of the poorest countries in Europe. I mean, and it didn't used to be. I mean, it was. After all, remember, people used to say Ukraine is the sort of the breadbasket of the Soviet Union. I mean, it was always with the Donbass. I mean, it was an agricultural and industrial powerhouse of the USSR. So that's all gone. Anyway, we have a comment from our friend Heyman. Heyman, it's a great name. Says being a Karen is a great way to lose friends and allies. Do you have a sense of who Karen is? I mean, who the Karen in this case is?
Okay, well, obviously the West is the Karen because they get triggered. They get triggered so easily, and they get triggered in their imagination, not based on reality. It's a perception of they're being attacked because of their identity or their values. Okay, no, the West is the ultimate Karen. Great question. Great observation.
Yeah, no, I think Karen. Yeah, no, I think that's right. So they're kind of subjected to this attack. But the interesting thing is, I mean, I guess also like going back to the Karen thing is that. They so well we're right behind you, we're right with you, Ukraine, we're standing with you, we're going to fight, just the two of us shoulder to shoulder against this horrible, nasty, evil Russian bear. But we're kind of getting out right now because you see, we don't really want to get into a fight with the Russians because we might get hurt, and we don't want to start a nuclear war. Unless we absolutely have to.
We don't want to upset. We don't want to upset Biden because
exactly. So that's right. So the British have already said we are pulling out all of our forces from Ukraine. So
no worries. No worries.
So you egg on these people, you can encourage them to get into this fight. And then, well, we're kind of leaving right now. The plane is on the tarmac and we're heading out. Good luck fighting the Russians. We're right with you, 2 thumbs up. So
yeah. And we can Zoom anytime you want. Don't worry, okay?
That's right. So the fact is that if you are going to take that attitude, and it's a reasonable attitude, you don't want to get into a nuclear confrontation with Russia. But if you are going to take that attitude, then the responsible thing should always have been, hey, we aren't going to get into a war, which means you don't want to get into a war that you're going to lose. So therefore, the best thing to do is to work out an agreement. It's going to be best for you, and it's going to be best for Russia. Instead of constantly aggravating, and then we're on our way out. Good luck with everything. We hope everything's going to work out for you. That's the most irresponsible thing you can do.
So when the Czech Republic became a member of NATO and Slovakia became a member of NATO, they did it at no cost. Right. I mean, there's not going to be a war. Right. They're surrounded by friendlies. Okay. Right. And now these countries are beginning, but you're going to let this guy in because, well, I mean, don't you realize they have a conflict with this guy right here? Right. I mean, now we're all targets. No. We didn't sign up to that. Yeah. I thought we were a defensive alliance.
Well, I think that's how they.
I think it's true buyer's remorse. I think it really is, because this is not what they signed up for. They didn't sign up for a war with Russia. No.
No, that's it. Because I think they really did think, and that's how it was sold, that this is some kind of a supper club. You become a member, and then you get invited to these convivial suppers, and it's very nice. There'll be excellent wine and excellent meals. The champagne will be flowing, and there are no consequences. No one's going to have to pay any kind of a cost. And then suddenly you find that this isn't actually a supper club; it's a military alliance, and it means that it imposes obligations upon you, and kind of very, very nasty obligations. So there was never really any kind of a proper debate, which should have taken place. And there were people who used to say, hey, there should be a debate about this, about expanding NATO. We're handing out these commitments, like candy. Shouldn't there be some sort of a discussion? No. It just shows the irresponsibility of the Western political elites, that they never really gave any of this any thought. And even now, when they just keep blustering on about, well, this is Article 10 of the North Atlantic Treaty, it says anyone can come in. Well, okay, you want to stick with that?
Yeah, but if you've pointed this out previously, George, it's not that you apply. No, you're invited. Okay, it's very different. Look, George and I have read the NATO Charter. Everyone that invokes it, I doubt any of them have read it at all. Okay, including Stoltenberg. Okay.
No. That's right. You are invited by a unanimous decision. And if the members of the North Atlantic Alliance are convinced that this new member will add to security. Well, how are you going to persuade any of the members of NATO, that the admission of Ukraine will add to world security? And the fulfillment of the United Nations Charter, which is also part of the preamble to the North Atlantic Treaty. So I don't think anyone's going to be persuaded by this. Back then, when George W. Bush, truly a horrible president. This was his last kind of FU to everyone. But in 2008, his last year in office, of trying to push Ukraine and Georgia into NATO. And then, the French and the Germans tried to resist that, and then they came up with a sort of a compromise. They can aspire to membership. It'll be, one day there will be members. But of course, the moment you put that in, it's like, that means one day, boom. You mean one day, and that's tomorrow. So, which is, of course, always the case.
Well, and of course, because the NATO bureaucracy, they need something to do. Okay.
Yes.
I mean, they keep saying, that they're a defensive alliance. We're protecting our values, whatever values they are. No one's explained that to us. But it's as George and I have said from the very beginning. For NATO to continue to exist, it must expand. It must create an enemy, and it has created one. It identifies Russia as the Russians read. They have the internet, George.
Yes.
They read this stuff. Okay.
That's right. Yeah. No, that's right. That's why all of its proclamations that, whoa, we are defensive, always sound so hollow, because the Russians look and they say what we have said many times over. Well, if you're defensive, then by definition you stay where you are. You hold on to what you've got, and you don't expand. When you expand, then you're kind of being aggressive. You're moving beyond your land.
At the very least, you have an appetite.
Yeah, that's right. So they do this, and even if it was just that, if it was just simply expanding, you might say, oh, all right, they mean well, they mean defensive, but how the hell are you going to accept the bombing of Yugoslavia as defensive? How the hell are you going to accept the attack on Libya as defensive? There's no way. There's just no way. And that's why Stoltenberg and all the rest of the clowns, when they start with all their weaselly words, they can't get around this. What you did was aggressive, and above all, it was in defiance of the United Nations, which means that you defied your own North Atlantic Treaty, because everybody, we will of course be acting in compliance with the United Nations Charter. We're implementing the UN Charter. No, you violated the UN Charter.
Well, you violated Article 1.
That's it.
Of your charter. No, this is the way it's going. I mean, tomorrow George will be on Crosstalk tomorrow, and what I'm calling the program. Crying Wolf. That's the title of the program. So that's kind of a tidbit for those, a spoiler, as it were. But that's what we're talking about here. I mean, how much longer can you keep this suspense up when even the Ukrainians are saying, and they've been saying this for a while, crisis? What crisis? What are you talking about?
Yes, that's another thing for them. It's like, you're not doing very much here for Ukraine. I mean, you're moving all these dependents out. You're telling all citizens, these citizens, American citizens who are in Ukraine, they have to leave within 24 to 48 hours. So therefore, you're causing panic in Ukraine. Hard to see how you're doing anything to advance, the Ukraine's economy, Ukraine's way of life. I mean, you're kind of undermining the very state. So, but again, as far as the West is concerned, what do they care?
Well, I mean, Zelensky's plummeting opinion polls have nothing to do with Russia. It has to do with the economy.
Right.
It has to do with COVID. It has to do with inflation.
Right.
It has to do with its severe energy crisis.
Yeah,
There's nothing to do with what Western powers, particularly the Anglo-Saxon powers, are talking about. That's not Zelensky's real problems. Okay,
right.
It's not their machinations.
That's right.
It's the country is becoming ungovernable. He has been sidelined completely by the powers that be, and so you have these oligarchs and you have the Western ambassadors. That's how Ukraine works.
But what's interesting is also notice which countries are telling their people to leave Ukraine. Either members of NATO, or some members of NATO, or countries closely aligned with the United States, such as Israel. So it's very odd. I mean, how come, Brazil, what about the Brazilians or, or Argentines or, Ghanaians, no one else seems to be leaving. Apparently they feel safe. If you're a Nigerian, you think, oh, I'm okay. Nothing's going to happen to me. Someone Colombia, I'm good. I mean, I'll be okay. So very, very odd. Apparently, only if you're Japanese are you under any kind of a threat in the immediate future in Ukraine. So
You bring up such an important point, George, and I think we need to stress it again. Historically speaking, and George and I like to take the long view of things, when is there in modern history outside of Barbarossa an unprovoked attack with the goal unclear? Now, if it was for right to protect, okay, Russian ethnic minority is under siege. It's facing ethnic cleansing. Okay, I mean, we have nothing like that is out there. It's just Kiev could be under siege in 2 days.
That's right. Yeah, but that's the thing. In all of these cases, you have a list of demands. You have an ultimatum. In other words,
the Japanese had a list of demands.
Exactly. So you don't, Barbarossa, I think, is unique in history. I mean, as far as I know, in which you just simply attack and offer no justification whatsoever. Nothing. I mean, you can't even, the limit, somehow, you couldn't even stage some kind of an incident at the border. Even that you couldn't do because, Stalin had been so careful not to do anything that might be provocative. So you came up with nothing. And of course, as you say, ultimately it was the undoing of the Nazi attack, which is they had no clear agenda. What are they trying to achieve? And so they kind of got confused in all the different goals and didn't really achieve any of them. But yeah, which is what happens when you don't have a clear objective in your war aims.
And that's why George and I have said from the beginning here, in the most dispassionate way that we can, is that there are certain circumstances. If, for example, NATO, for some strange reason, tonight said Ukraine is a member of NATO. It's a red line that Russia will not tolerate. If even not being a member of NATO, offensive weapon, how Russia would determine offensive intermediate nuclear missiles, something like that, something that was very, people forget, but in the 1980s, that was a really big issue, okay? And they got rid of, rightly got rid of that category for Europe. If those are installed, that's another red line, okay? There are reasons why Russia would act in what it would call a defensive kinetic way. Okay, none of these things are talked about. I have to talk to Jimmy Dore of all people to air these things on a rather large platform, because even Fox News, MSNBC, and CNN, they all are speaking the same nonsense talking points.
Fox News is over because there are people like this horrible creature Brett Baer, who's supposedly part of the serious, hard news. They say, well, all right, you've got all these people in prime time, the opinion host, but the rest of the time, they have these hard news people, and Brett Baer is hard news. He's one of the worst. I mean, he's constantly, whipping up this hysteria about imminent Russian attack, and then you have these. There's these, experts like Britt Hume. I don't know how he gets to be an expert. He was just a White House correspondent for years and years. For no particular reason other than he was sort of
he was a White House correspondent when Joe Biden was in the Roman Senate. You remember?
Yeah, I think so. I think he's even said something like that. I was kind of working in the White House or in Congress at the time of the Watergate. I remember John Dean's testimonies. He was still doing exactly the same thing, way back 1973. So, but in terms of the primetime host at Fox, I mean, other than Tucker Carlson, the rest of them kind of go along with this. I mean, Hannity is, of course, absolutely demented on the subject of Russia, but Ingram kind of, she kind of hems and haws and hedges.
Depends on the day of the week.
Exactly.
It depends on her guests.
Yeah, exactly.
But she has no point of center gravity on this at all, because she's too afraid, and she just wants to curry favor. She likes, it's all access. She wants to have access to important people because she feels so insecure for some weird reason. I don't know. And of course, Hannity, I mean, he's more worried about Benjamin Netanyahu being prosecuted. I'm sorry, I don't want to go into it. But what are you talking about, man?
was just that's just something else. He was like Benjamin Netanyahu. Oh my God! Oh.
Whoa!
That's it. So we have a super chat from Flying Boar. Thank you so much, Flying Boar. Says, I can't stand Olympics anymore because it's so corrupt and politicized. Yeah,
I thought it was over.
I think it's going to go on for another week. And then says that Russian figure skater. What's the update on her? This is a Russian figure skater that has been accused of doping. I'm very wary of the whole subject of doping. I mean, if you tell me that this is all she's just targeted because she's Russian and they, they're just the whole Olympic Committee is politicized, I'll buy that. I'm willing to believe that. But I do think that, and I don't know anything really about this this young woman, but the Russians have kind of admitted essentially that there has been doping in Russian sport. I mean, they say it's part of a kind of global problem and so on, but they haven't denied that that there was doping, and again, doping in the recent past. But I mean, obviously, it's political in the sense that it's always the Russians who are being picked on, even though, I mean, it's nonsensical. I mean, doping is universal in sport. I mean, we just know this, that
well, what was the American bicyclist Armstrong, Lance Armstrong?
Exactly, Lance Armstrong. Yeah, that was.
He doped everything, everything.
Yeah.
on the story that the Gaggler has mentioned, I see the headlines. I'm sorry, I just been really consumed with other things, but I can default to George's position. Doping is a problem everywhere, but if you can put a target on a Russian, it's really good for clickbait. But I'm not agreeing or disagreeing with the accusation because I don't know. All right.
Right. No, that's how I feel. So so I'm willing to, if for Russian, to say, hey, we're being picked on because of Russian, and it's like we're asked to believe that no one else is doping in sport, and I just that's just nonsensical. I mean, we know that this is widespread, the widespread problem, and a lot of athletes, and particularly their trainers, have become very good at avoiding the testing and so on, because the tests are supposed to be random, but they're often not random. So if the athletes have given advance notice as to when the test will take place, then they have time to stop taking the drug. So, there's all sorts of ways in which they can get around it. And we've heard notorious stories what happens when it is random, and then the athlete is there, and then he suddenly, pow, goes off to the toilet, through the window, into the car, and just vanishes. Oh, sorry, I suddenly realized that I had a dental appointment I had to do. So there are all sorts of ways that athletes get around when it is a random test, and they think that they're going to detect some drugs. So
one thing is for sure, Russian athletes are targeted. That's for sure. There's no doubt.
I agree there. So, but I was going to mention, Peter, that article you sent me today, which was quite interesting, about from Russia Matters, this I don't know who the author was.
I don't either.
It was obviously a Ukrainian, and he obviously was pulling his punches, but he was kind of asking a question: why can't Ukraine be neutral? What's so terrible about neutrality? And he didn't come to any strong conclusion.
Fair enough.
Yeah,
I thought there was a bit of honesty in that.
Right, exactly. But I thought there was something that was very interesting. He cited a poll. And he said, well, there has been an increase in support for NATO membership. And then he cited a poll conducted by the International Republican Institute, which is funded by the US government. But even that showed something like 54% of Ukrainians support NATO membership. And that's, of course, not counting all the people who are in the Donbass, who would obviously not be for it. So that's 54%. And then this author, who's very honest, he said, but it all depends on how you frame the question. Because if you were to frame the question, which is preferable, NATO membership or non-aligned status, then suddenly the non-aligned status, I think, got 46%, and NATO membership was 40%. So that's 40%, and not counting the Russian region. So therefore, you'd have to say, by a considerable margin, Ukrainians, even now, because this poll was December 2021, even by a considerable margin, there's no enthusiasm in Ukraine for NATO membership.
What I found really interesting, and I think that there was one more section that could have been added, because it was very methodical. I thought there was some intellectual honesty there as well, though I thought there was cutting of corners, not because the Donbass is part of Ukraine or not part of Ukraine.
Right,
I mean,
right,
that it was kind of left floating in the air.
Right.
But another issue that's really important is that you don't live in a vacuum. Countries live in neighborhoods, okay?
Yes.
Countries have relations, good and bad. And so for the looking at it from a regional perspective, a neighborhood perspective, what status is best for Ukraine and the
Right.
entire neighborhood? Is
Right.
one solution perfect for everyone? Probably not. Is one solution basically satisfying for all? Probably yes.
Right. Right. Exactly.
That's what I drew from it. And the author of this didn't want to go to that.
Right.
I think it could have been broadened out.
Yeah, no, I think it's that's exactly right. And the fact was that when Yanukovych moved towards essentially neutrality, that Ukraine should have a status of neutrality, that was a popular move. That was, that what didn't make him unpopular in Ukraine. It was unpopular within NATO because all their plans were suddenly shot. That great hopes for Yushchenko, that whole Orange Revolution, and suddenly the Ukrainians were clearly turning their back on that. So it was a problem for the Europeans and the Americans, but the Ukrainians were not at all unhappy with that, and it was a reasonable compromise. I mean, because, as we've said many times before, Ukraine is a very divided country. And when you have a very divided country, then you can't make major constitutional changes without antagonizing severely a very large chunk of the population. That's clearly what Yushchenko did after the Orange Revolution. Was a disaster. And Yanukovych continued to the end, trying to balance, the two parts of the country, the East and West.
And he tried to balance the EU and Russia. So
Right.
He was not only doing it within Ukraine, he was doing it on a much broader scale, international scale. And he ultimately failed. I blame him for making a lot of bad decisions.
Yeah.
I think the Maidan should have been cleared, just
Absolutely.
clear it out, okay?
Yeah.
And he hesitated and he lost everything.
Yeah. No, that's right. He hesitated. It was clearly, he should have realized you are being set up. I mean, this is the West is moving in on this. They're not just going to let this go. They're not just going to let the people disperse. No, they kept that going, and then they staged the whole thing with the snipers. So yeah, that was that. But now, what of course happened is that again the Orange Revolution crowd immediately took power after the overthrow of Yanukovych, and again they pushed for their one-sided view. And they changed the constitution, and the result is, you've lost the East. I mean, that was it. I mean, that's what happened. You ran through, your ends, boom. Then you're going to lose, a large part of your population. I mean, that was, the West doesn't seem to realize this. And the moment you try to make it, I mean, they should have learned this from Yugoslavia. The moment you try to ram through a major constitutional change that is opposed by a very substantial chunk of the population, the country just going to break up. They're not going to go for it.
We see this, one size fits all.
Right.
And I hate saying it's complicated because liberals say that when they don't have an answer. Well, I have an answer. It is complicated for the very reasons that George has presented us here. It is, see, you can't have a government in Ukraine that refuses to take in consideration millions and millions of other citizens because of their faith, the language they speak, historical renditions that they adhere to, and fond relationships that they have with foreign countries. The
Right.
Galicians, you know, I mean, I'm safe here in Moscow, but you Galician guys, okay, your whole rendition of Ukraine was invented by your Habsburg friends, okay?
Right.
They created your myth for you, okay? And now 14,000 people in the Donbass are dead for your, you know, your imagined community.
Yeah. That's right. And that's, you know, and it was a catastrophe. There's another thing that was interesting about that article, and that was in the footnote, because in the footnote it referred to the Budapest Memorandum, and then and then you had to follow the link to a conference that was held in 2019, which involved some of the people who negotiated the Budapest Memorandum. So, you know, we've talked about this before, but just, you know, quickly summarizing, the Budapest Memorandum was the agreement to move the nuclear weaponry, missiles, warheads, everything from Ukrainian soil to Russia. Ukraine wanted to be paid. I mean, that's basically what it was. They wanted to get a lot of money for this, and they got quite a bit of money. But the point was that the issue was that, well, was some kind of a guarantee offered to Ukraine, you know, in return for this, you know, the move of these nuclear weaponry from their territory. And it's clear from the people who participated said, no, specifically rejected by James Baker, no guarantees. In other words, that, you know, all we're doing is offering assurances based on the boilerplate. You know, we've already, you know, like the Helsinki Final Act, United Nations Charter, Charter of Paris. That's all. No additional guarantees.
The only thing that the assurance was, well, we'll discuss it on at the Security Council of the UN. That was the only assurance.
That's it. Yeah. That's right. So, but it is very, very interesting, because in other words, this was a very deliberate thing. You know, like, you know, people like Baker, you know, they're not stupid, and they, you know, they come to these negotiations. You know, he's a lawyer, and then he's saying, hey, you know, these people are trying to get some sort of a guarantee from us. So, you know, we're offering some guarantees for your territorial integrity or your security. We're not going to offer you any guarantees. We're just going to say, hey, we subscribe to the principles of the Helsinki Final Act and the UN Charter. That's all.
And maybe that is the most important, invidious difference that we have from the Bakers of the world to the Stoltenbergs of the world, because Stoltenberg is passing out guarantees like candy on Halloween.
Right.
Baker would say, no trick or treat.
Right.
No,
That's
no.
it.
There was a pressing, and it was a very important issue, and it was done soberly and calmly, cool heads. Get these weapons out, okay? Because they're just going to be a festering problem for the Russians, for the Ukrainians, for the Europeans, for everybody.
Yes.
Because, you know, one of my favorite films is Lord of War, and it's about illicit arms transfers from Ukraine, not Russia.
Right. Yeah, that's right. So, but it's a very interesting thing, because, you know, this Budapest Memorandum that, you know, most people have never heard of has suddenly been invoked. You know, I think it was either Thoroughly Modern Millie or the other guy, the Lloyd Austin, one of them, you know, the other day. So, oh, well, the Budapest Memorandum, you know, we gave some sort of guarantees. No, it wasn't that. There was nothing like that. Because,
well, I mean, much to the chagrin of the Ukrainians, okay?
Yeah,
because they felt like, okay, they got paid, okay, and Ukrainians like to be paid first, more than anything else. Believe me, okay.
Right.
And can get a little bit extra. No, you got what you wanted, okay, and we got what we wanted.
Right. But the interesting thing is, of course, and again, you know, it's an obvious point, and we of course knew this, but it's nice to be reminded of that. The same thing was done in Belarus and Kazakhstan, because there were nuclear weapons stationed there. And strangely enough, no one is saying, hey, Belarus is supposed to be having, Lukashenko is supposed to have, nuclear weapons, or Kazakhstan is supposed to have nuclear weapons. So this was an agreement that, applied to, these three former Soviet republics, to shift all those things up. But suddenly everyone only ever remembers, Ukraine, but the same thing happened. And, Kazakhstan, that's a very important place.
But the Ukrainians gave up their nukes. You hear that all the time. It just cringes. It's cringe.
So we have another super chat from Flying Boar. Thank you so much, Flying Boar. And he says, Yanukovych was a coward and corrupt. He should have done what Tokayev did and asked Russia for help. Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think if he was unable to handle it himself, then yeah, I mean, I don't see any reason why he couldn't have just gone to Russia. I mean, it's not very dignified, obviously, but countries have done very undignified things in the past. I mean, the Austrians weren't able to handle the Hungarians in 1848, and they turned to Russia and say, can you help us out? Because these Hungarians are so bloody obdurate, we can't deal with them. And Russia said, oh, all right, in the spirit of the Holy Alliance, we'll come and crush the Hungarians for you. So
yeah, what did the Russians get out of it in the end?
Yeah, nothing. Austria screwed Russia over.
The Austrians screwed Russia left, right, and center after that.
No question. Right, the Russians.
It's a very interesting thing. I've had this conversation with people before, and I can come around to it just like we just did there. But I remember it so clearly. I couldn't, at the time, I just didn't think Yanukovych would be so stupid. I just couldn't imagine that, here's the okay, he was a bar bouncer in earlier iteration of the guy. Okay, he's not an intellectual, okay, that's for sure, okay. But he won. I mean, there are some people that say, the Orange Revolution election he won, that will go down in history as who knows, okay? But he did win when he ran again, okay?
Yeah.
And I just would have thought, when he was elected, Western countries, congratulations, Mr. Yanukovych. All through the OSCE world, And then when it was being taken away from him, he didn't do much about it. So I have no warm and fuzzy feelings for Yanukovych at all, zero, because he's a failure. He lost.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. But I mean, at the same time, you always feel that when people are in that situation, he's subjected to this onslaught from the West. I mean, this was a major onslaught. I mean, it's a big deal when a senior U.S. administration official like Victoria Nuland comes to Maidan and starts handing out cookies. It's a big deal when Carl Bildt, this major European figure, comes in and starts saying, well, you have to make a civilizational choice. You're either with us or with those Orientals, these Mongols, in other words, saying for Russia. So that was a big onslaught. And you have to feel, now, I don't know, we don't know what exactly transpired in conversations. He and Putin must have had extensive conversations. But I think Putin, should have just said, we're going to have to take this over from you, because you don't seem to be able to realize what kind of a onslaught that you're under. So, but I don't know. I mean, I don't know whether Putin offered and Yanukovych said no, or what happened. But clearly this was beyond Yanukovych's abilities to handle.
Maybe Yanukovych gave his assurances that he could take care of it. Okay. Right. I mean, I don't like losers. I don't really care. He blew it. Okay. He ran for his life. Okay. Right. So, I mean, running for your life means that, it had turned into a very ugly, lawless, illegal, and you couldn't marshal the forces to save your own country that you were genuinely elected to.
Yeah, that's right. I was kind of reminded of, you remember in Godfather 2, right at the beginning, there's this big party, and Fredo he's unable to control his wife. His wife is drunk and she's kind of flirting with every man and trying to humiliate Fredo. And then Michael Corleone says to him, "Look, if you can't handle your wife, I'm going to have to do it for you." And Fredo says, "Yeah, you're probably going to have to do it." And so Michael then sends some of his goons, and they just simply carry off Fredo's wife. So it's a bit like that. You got Michael Corleone says, "Look, you can't do it. We're going to have to do it for you." And I think that, when it got to about February 2014, clearly Yanukovych just seemed completely in over his head. He didn't realize just how intense this onslaught was. When you've got NATO, the EU, you've got Washington, they're all lined up against you, and he couldn't handle it.
Yeah, but the same institutions and people were patting you on the back,
yeah.
And then 24 hours later, I didn't even know him. Okay, right. What? We might have met once years ago. It was a buffet. I don't know who you're talking about.
Yeah, that's right.
Completely disowned him. Remember?
Yep.
Within a news cycle. Oh,
yes.
No, he works for Putin. I don't know him.
So we have another super chat from Jonathan. Says, where does the Russian Communist Party compare ideologically in the Western globalist parties? So I think he's talking about the current Russian Communist Party, which is different from the old CDSU and the Communist Party of Russia. But to be honest, how does it compare ideologically? It's obviously it's opposed to Putin, but what is its ideological makeup? It's with Zyuganov, its leader, and
if you use a European, it's social democratic. I think it's pretty, milk toast. There's nothing particularly attractive about it. They pick up on certain social inequalities, social injustices. They really pick up on that. It's still, in my opinion at least, it's really the only real political party in Russia in a way. Okay. Right. But it shed all of its Leninist ideology. Yes. Completely. I know a lot of people and their parents are still members of, or are current members of the Russian Communist Party. And the thing that inspires them is the war, defeating Nazism. It's much more of a cultural thing, and that's what they were brought up with too. Okay, so you have to remember, at the end of the Second World War, you have the Communist Party of the Soviet Union that it became detached from a lot of the ideological precepts of the foundations of the Soviet Union. So what you had in the 50s, it started under Khrushchev, though I'm not sure he's particularly behind it, but we won the war. The party won the war. Yes. And that was the new legitimizing issue for the Communist Party. We won the war. And it's no surprise that you shoot up to the Gorbachev era, and what is he talking about? Because of the melees, the lack of economic growth, opportunities started disappearing, and he wanted to go back to Leninist norms. Remember that?
Yes.
Which is just BS. Okay, and
yes.
Okay, but you have to see what legitimized the Soviet Union with the Bolsheviks, the Civil War. They won the Civil War. Okay, they won the Civil War. The Bolsheviks won the Civil War, and that's how they legitimized it. And then you have Stalin. We industrialized at great cost, but we industrialized. Okay, we can actually take on the UK now. Okay, all of Russia can take on the UK. Okay, and then you see these iterations here. So the Communist Party of the Russian Federation, they legitimize themselves through the historical memory, which is impossible for anyone to deny. Okay. And then social inequalities, a lot of the social problems that they have in the West, they have in Russia too. Russia is a normal country in that respect.
So so it's not a continuation of the Communist Party of the Soviet Republic of Russia, and it's not the continuation. So but I mean, I just wonder what does it mean? It's not a continuation. That means they don't have access to what the archives, or they don't have access to.
Everybody has access to.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I mean, so in other words, what does it mean when they say you are not the continuation? In other words, it's a separate party. I mean,
I think that. Okay, given the name, given the cadres, I mean, it's the older ones. Yes, it is obviously a continuation. The Communist Party's property was confiscated, but they got some of it back. Okay,
they got some of it back. Okay, yeah.
Got some of it back, and they lost their bank accounts, almost all of them. It was defund the communist movement.
Yes, that's right.
Okay. But I mean, there was no denying that there were plenty of people. See, one of the things that people don't understand about the Soviet Union, and I think Sheila Fitzpatrick, the historian, she hit upon it. It was very, very controversial at the time. But you have to understand the Soviet Union, for better or worse, and I want to be very neutral about this, but there was social mobility for a lot of people. Okay, yes. A lot of people went from being born in a barn, a hut, yes, to being a university professor in one lifetime.
Yeah, no, that's true. That's very true. Yeah,
and what that is, again, the opportunity. That's something that they attach themselves to. Being a member of the Communist Party of the Russian Federation is like, it's like I drink Diet Coke. I mean, it's not like nobody really cares. Okay.
Yeah, no, there's no question. It's so particularly in the aftermath of the Great Purge, the people who ended up at the top around about 1939, they were very young. So they, and they went on and on and on. So unfortunately, then there was no change whatever at the top, and so those people who were very young in 1939 have become quite old by 1980. So, which is that whole gerontocracy.
I'll give you a perfect example of that. When I moved to Russia to live full time, I moved here in 1998, and I lived in the Stalin skyscraper, Krasna Vorota, Red Gate, and then the August 1998 financial crisis happened, and I'm in this, really palatial apartment. I mean, I'm like, oh my God, my origins are Irish peasantry, and I'm in this palatial Stalin, apartment in the center of Moscow. And the owner of it was named Yuri, and he said, Peter, do you want to buy this apartment, because the economy was in shambles. And I said, well, is it really yours, Yuri? Because that's a big problem with, privatization and, in the Soviet Union, Eastern Europe. I saw it living in Poland. And he said, let me put it to you this way. My father was a 39er. It's mine. Because this is how you courted and captured elites, okay? Beautiful apartment in the center of the city, a dacha in the countryside, the different spas that you could go to. They were called, what are they, for us in the West, it's asylums? No, what's the term of the, it has a negative term for us in English, but for sanatorium, go to a sanatorium and stuff like that.
Sanatorium, yes.
But I mean, it was all, you have to remember, it was an economy that was not based on money. It was based on privilege.
Right.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. No, that's right. And again, but towards the end of his life, it's clear that Stalin had become quite disgusted with the fact that he has created this very privileged group of people. And there's grumbling, there were grumblings. I think Svetlana kind of had him grumbling, you're a goddamn privileged caste. It was a very nasty term. And, all the evidence is that he was planning some great purge in his last days, but he no longer had the physical capacity to pull that off.
And that's why I had my, God bless his soul, our good friend that passed away a few years ago, Stephen Cohen, is that I mentioned that with him in one of his visits to Moscow. When he was in good health, he came to Moscow every single year, and every time I always made sure I tried my very best to get through his wife, because she was the gatekeeper, to meet him at least for coffee, maybe for dinner. And his book, the last Bolshevik, Bukharin. And my argument always, I said, no, Stalin was the last Bolshevik.
Right.
He was the last one. He was actually ideological the day of his death. He was.
Yeah, no question. It's sort of strange also that that Cohen to the end remained a big admirer of Gorbachev. I mean, I never heard him say anything negative about him. Now, he obviously became friends with Gorbachev in later years, and obviously I think they were quite close. But at the same time, I mean, he could just never really take a proper look at him. And there was he inherited a going concern, and it just slipped through his hands within 6 years. That doesn't speak well for you as a leader. If you're a leader, you're supposed to inherit something, and then you pass it on to the next generation, stronger and more feared than it was when you got it. And you kind of think this is a person who went from one harebrained scheme to another. Big institutional changes here, big institutional changes there, and he never seemed to think that where is all this going to end? I mean, it's it can easily crumble when you just start tinkering around with the system. It's going to crumble very quickly. So I'm surprised that
Cohen was deeply enamored with the Communist Party being able to democratize itself.
Right.
And the problem with that is that you have the festering nationality problem, which it short circuits everything. Because if you see that the current regime is willing to compromise and transform itself, then you say, well, why don't we just do it in Uzbekistan? Okay, right. Let's just do it in Ukraine, and and then Yeltsin say, yeah, why don't we just do it in Russia? Okay, right. I mean. Right. It was not thought out. What people in the West don't understand is that we invented Gorbachev. We invented him. He was our creation. He wasn't that. When people in the West were spoon-fed about Gorbachev, nobody here believes that. Okay, that's their Gorbachev. It's not ours, because our guy screwed up. Okay, but he'll always be Gorby. Which right. No one here would ever say. I mean, no one.
No, that's right. I remember I was thinking today, there was a episode of Crosstalk. It was already many years ago, and you had some people there who were talking about what great men in history, and then somebody said Gorbachev, and then somebody said Yeltsin was a great man. And you kind of blew up at that, and you said, Yeltsin? Who the hell thinks Yeltsin is a great man? But I can't remember who the person was who said, you don't remember this?
I don't. There are so many. What I do remember, George, is people that have fairy tales about that period. It's just pure fairy tales, okay? And, they can live with their fairy tales, but the people here took the brunt of it, okay? It is 2022. But people remember the 1990s. Yeah. It is the Great Depression moment of a generation that is still alive. Yeah. Okay. My father, when I was growing up in the 60s and 70s, my father still had the Great Depression and World War II in his head. Right. Why, for God's sake, in the 1970s, that when there was aluminum foil, he would just roll it up in a ball, and then you go to the of the storage room, and like these huge balls of tin. And then twine, all these, you might use it one day. I mean, it's just because that was the Depression. Yeah. Well, why would you throw something away that you can use again? That was the Depression that was still in his mind. Yep. Decades later, that applies to Russia, what happened in the 1990s.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And I think that, and that applies also to Gorbachev, before that, because people, there is a Soviet nostalgia. And after all, the Soviet Union ceased to exist in 1991, so that's 30 years ago. So many people have a living memory of the Soviet Union. People in the 50s and above, have a living memory of it. And they say, well, you kind of lost that. This was not a bad country. We had great accomplishments, and it was we had all of these republics which were part of the same country. We had a universal language, universal passport, and above all, we were feared in the world. I mean, people were very worried about what the Soviet leaders said, and you kind of, you know, it's all lost. So,
Well, when the Soviet Union was established, a huge percentage of the country was completely illiterate.
Yeah.
Completely. Okay. Yeah. And then by the end of the Soviet Union, how many Nobel Prize in physics and chemistry and on and on. I mean, huge. And then you think a lot of those laureates, they went to the UK, France, and the United States. Okay. And they took their expertise there. I mean, you know, I live here. This is my country now. This is my home right now. And the Soviet legacy, there's nothing definitive about it. It is in flux. It's with you. You feel it. You know it. You reflect upon it. It touches you. It's weird, but 30 years later, I don't feel threatened by it. Right. And I'm the goofy Westerner American that studied Soviet history and asked uncomfortable questions sometimes, you know, like Yuri's apartment. You know, I'm a 1930. My father was a 39 guy, and he was amazed that as an American, I knew what he was talking about.
Right. But the interesting thing is that, you know, if you think of, all right, they win the Bolsheviks, they win the Civil War, but then, you know, Lenin dies, and then you actually have a very divided leadership, and it's by no means clear that the Soviet Union will survive, because they're all divided. They haven't really decided who is going to be Lenin's successor. You know, they're divided on basically which way to go. You know, to go on with this the new economic policy, or go back to more traditional communism. Very, so if you were a betting man, you would think they're not going to survive. You know, they're going to basically at each other's throats, and it'll be over within a couple of years. And there you see Stalin's genius. I mean, that he won out, the one that no one predicted that he would be the win out in the power struggle. It was a ferocious struggle, and he made it stronger. I mean, with his ruthless policies, by the time you get to the the 1970s and 80s, whatever the problem, you think, that whole era of the weak, divided leadership, that was a long way beyond. I mean, it was now a very formidable power.
Yeah, but the legitimizing issue of winning the Great War.
Yeah.
I mean, it was important, but I mean, it wasn't completely sustainable. I mean, through generations, then it becomes more of a memory and a tradition. And you have to also keep in mind, the Soviet Union wasn't hermetically closed, okay? I mean, it was pretty closed, but it wasn't hermetically closed. And, fashion, music, ideas, it started seeping in, and you had, people like Sakharov and people like, which I have negative feelings towards, we can do a separate video on that if you want. But I mean, and it's a time-honored disaster for Russia, because you have people that worship the West, and then you have the Slavophiles. It's never resolved. It is a constant in Russian history, okay? Right. And you have it even to this day, because Russian liberals, they are slavish for the West, towards the West, slavishly, okay? Right. They self-hating Russians, they hate their culture, they hate their history, and they're actually very racist people as well. Because we shouldn't be part of the East, and all these Eastern people are around it. They hold us back. Okay, this was an argument that was going on in 1922, and it was an argument that was going on in 1862.
Yeah. No, that's right. And but the interesting thing is that we get to the 1970s, and the World War II and the victory of World War II was already becoming stale. So, well, how long are we going to go on dining out on that? But curiously enough, 50 years on, World War II has actually grown in magnitude. So back then, it seemed like, this is really getting very tiresome.
But it was detached from a legitimizing purpose for the powerful, okay? Now it is something that everyone can consume. It is actually very democratic now, okay? Because the party doesn't determine the meaning of the events, of the celebration. It is a completely universal democratic concept. And I think that's so liberating. That's wonderful, because that's what it should be, okay?
Right, right.
And that's what binds people together. When the
Yes.
party would say, we rule because we won the war, yeah, that doesn't work for a very long time, okay?
No, I think I think it's a very good, that's a very good point. I mean, because, if you look back on that, the victory parade, it was held, I think it was in July 1945, the big victory parade. And there's Zhukov, reading this speech, and he say, this victory was won by the greatness of the Communist Party and the wisdom of our great leader, Joseph Vissarionovich Stalin. So that's it. They won the war. Not the Russian people, not the Soviet people. They won the war. The party and the brilliance of Joseph Vissarionovich Stalin.
And it doesn't. There's an image when you think of the 1980s and the waning days of the Soviet Union. And this is not to besmirch any veteran, not at all. But when you have Brezhnev come out with the full metal jacket, I mean, how many more medals can you put on there, okay? Because there's no food in the stores. There are queues. People are getting very, very upset. This is supposed to be the greatest country, the greatest social experiment of all time, and it's not producing, okay? The social contract collapsed, and just because you won the war doesn't mean I have to forgive you for worrying about my children. Okay, that's what. And when you detach it from the Communist Party, then it's my favorite holiday here. I love Victory Day. Okay, if the weather is good, what everybody, what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to go and buy flowers, and you see veterans. They intentionally come out on the street, and I go downtown, and they have their caps and their. Whatever they have for their regalia, it's varied. Okay, these are elderly people, and you go up and you give them a flower, and you see, and they're holding huge bouquets. Okay, and that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to say thank you.
Right. Yeah. Anyway, we have another.
What tradition do we have in the West today, George? Like that? None. Sorry.
No, there's nothing like that at all. Yeah. So we have
last 10 minutes, because it's getting past my bedtime.
Yeah. So this is another super chat from Chiro Lewis, who says that maybe the biggest Soviet mistake is the same as the current Western elites: ideology over reality. It is a point the Chinese seem to have done better: make public administration professional. Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's clearly they had things, but I think that the problem that they had, which I think the Chinese haven't done, is that they somehow thought that they can somehow keep this ideology, this kind of Marxist Leninist ideology, but separate it from essentially their most important leader, which was Stalin. And so I think that, Khrushchev's idea that you can keep the ideology, keep all the tenets of Marxism, Leninism, but just say, oh, Stalin was a terrible person, the man who actually was the architect of the system, who ruled the country for at least 25 years. Well, he was really terrible. He messed up everything. He was an absolute disaster. But Lenin and Marx were great. And I think the Chinese realized it then, and I think that contributed to the Sino-Soviet split, that they thought, hey, you're shooting yourself in the foot. You can change policies. You don't have to pursue Stalin's policy, but you can't just denounce him and say he was a monster and everything he did was a disaster. And I think that, Khrushchev basically set in train for the collapse of the system, as the Chinese predicted, back in the 1950s.
Well, I mean, what the Chinese have been able to do with the CCP is change in continuity in the right balance. Okay. I mean, I think, obviously intelligent people know that, the Great Leap Forward was not a success. Okay? Yeah. And what is for the current elite, it's the Great Cultural Revolution, because they saw how destructive it could be. And then, and that is, and that's their anchor, that's their pillar. We're never, ever going back to that, ever, okay? Right. Because that was existential. They could have disappeared, okay? And so, and they saw the catastrophe of the Dumb and Dumber, Gorbachev and Yeltsin. You know,
Exactly.
you're going to play with. It's like a puzzle, and you're trying to make a new puzzle, a new picture.
Right.
No, for the Chinese, what the Yeltsin and Gorbachev did, they look at it as you're a pilot flying a plane, getting out and opening up the engine and trying to fiddle with it while it's flying. Yeah. Don't do that. Okay.
No, I absolutely agree. And I think it's very interesting that following Mao's death and then the arrival of Deng Xiaoping, Deng pretty much reversed all of Mao's policies, but he still kept the ideal of Mao. Mao is still worshipped. Yeah. And that's it. So in other words, the founder of the Communist Party, the great man, he's still there. He's still worshipped, even though they've abandoned
everything else.
Yeah. So, and that's something that the Russians were unable to do. You know, you can abandon all of Stalin's policies, but you don't attack him, because then you're really undercutting the foundation of the party, and ultimately the foundation of your right to rule. I mean, which is after what you have with the Communist Party. They proclaim for themselves their right to rule for all eternity.
Well, I mean, in Russian, when you talk about the Soviet period, you say "Vremya Sovietsky Vlast," okay, the time of Soviet power. It's not a very attractive thing, okay? It's not, okay? It's not, you know, the time of Mao or the time of Deng Xiaoping, because it's not personalized. You know, when you say, you know, the time of Soviet power, it's very sterile, okay? Mm-hmm. Even for people that are, you know, fondly remember it, it's very sterile. It doesn't give a human connection.
No, I don't know. That's right. And there was, you know, whatever you can say about the Stalinist era, there was an idealism. I mean, people really believed that, you know, putting in 20 hours a day, you know, they were furthering some great cause, you know, peace, brotherhood, the creation of socialism, the just equal society. You know, that's what justifies, you know, my putting in so much work for virtually no pay.
George is absolutely right. And what people can't understand, George and I are not trying to justify. We're trying to just explain and give a reason why it was appealing. Because, as I said, you know, you're born in a small village where your parents don't even wear shoes, okay? Yeah. Or maybe you have one pair of shoes and you carry them to church, and then you put them on when you go into church.
Right.
And then when you leave the church, you carry your shoes home and you walk home barefoot. And then suddenly, 5 years later, you're in a school. You're learning your language. You learn how to write. You end up going. You join the Komsomol. You know, the Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts of the Soviet Union, and you're given something to appreciate. Look what we have accomplished. Look at your grandparents. They're illiterate. Look at us. You know. Then you go to university. You get a university degree. You get a white collar job, which is of course the greatest dream. See, what Marx never understood, what communists never understood, is that people don't want the people that are in a socialist system. What they want to do is they want to get out of the working class. They want to be white collar people. They want to have a car. They want a dacha. They want, you know, and this is the social mobility, which is the in many ways demise of the system, because it was so successful for so many people.
Right. Yeah. No, that's right. And then they had these accomplishments. So you know, no one ever questioned that Soviet educational system. I mean, that, I really, that Stalinist system was a very good. I mean, it was a very old-fashioned kind of education. I mean, they just rammed down, rules of grammar, the classics, math, history, science. They just rammed, nothing whatever to do with, Western progressive ideas about education. So you came out, everyone who came out of that system was pretty well educated. It's not the same now, but whatever the Stalinist education system was, a kind of a byword of good education. People who hated Stalin said, "Hey, it was a pretty good education that I got." So you had that, and then of course you had all the rest. It became a superpower. I mean, that's no mean feat. To be able to compete with the United States. I mean, that's quite something. Where were they in 1913 where, you know, now suddenly they're the equal of the United States. That's a pretty bloody big deal.
You know, and that's why living here, obviously, as time goes on, people, because of just biology, people pass away. But, you know, I can remember years and years ago, I was on Red Square for some reason, and there were this protest of pensioners, and they had, I think it was like 2002 or something like that, and it was a 2002 calendar, and it had Stalin's image on it. And I was telling people that, I said, don't you find that disturbing? And I said, who am I to tell them they can't have their own historical memory? Who am I? I'm an American, okay? I'm not a Russian citizen. Who am I to say? Okay?
Right.
And that's what's perplexing about it. It's what's fascinating about it as well.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
History is in flux, okay? These wokesters in the US, you know, they know everything about history and they want to destroy it. You know, here, you learn from people in the US cannot even begin to understand the tragedies of the last century in this country. I mean, can't even comprehend.
Right. Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more. So, Peter, you want to wrap this up?
Yep.
I mean,
we apologize profusely.
Exactly. Apologize profusely, but we had, yeah.
Try to avoid it here. Okay. It sometimes happened. I thought YouTube had made a decision. It was more of a technical thing. We figured it out. And we really appreciate everyone that came by. We're really going to try to avoid this again, because I like to, when we say we're going to do something, I like to deliver. And we finally did here. So
we did deliver. You know, it took an hour to sort out, but we did it. We didn't, you know, we didn't give up. So, you know, all's well that ends
well.
well.
We didn't give up in Stalingrad. We didn't give up here.
Exactly.
Not that it's the same thing.
That's right. So,
all right, everybody. Well, this is the Gaggle. We're the Gaggle. We're on Locals, so please go to the gaggle.locals.com. As everyone saw yesterday, George and I had today was our Q&A. Thanks for everybody for coming here. We have a store, and George, you do a weekly live
streams Thursdays, 3 p.m. Eastern time. Please join me. Always a lot of fun. We have a good time, and you know, afterwards, you know, just before you get to the local bar, please make sure that there's some tinkling sound in the tip jar, because Buddy, I mean, he didn't even make an appearance. You know, he's so despondent about the state of the tip jar. So, but
no, he doesn't know. He's lounging. Okay.
Yeah. So, but we're very grateful for you know, all of your help and friendship and support. So anything you can contribute would be most appreciated. And remember, if you like the Gaggle, please like, share, and subscribe. See you soon. Bye.